He knew we were coming and simply retreated. We went in 21 miles and found only light resistance. Our goal was to limit the enemy's ability to attack us while we withdrew from South Vietnam. Ammunition stores were captured and food supplies destroyed. The action in Cambodia was also meant to serve a deeper purpose, a diplomatic one. In the theater of world politics, it was a signal to Hanoi and its allies in Peking and Moscow not to miscalculate. Although America was withdrawing from Vietnam, we were not defeated. We were still a force to be reckoned with.
If, when the chips are down, the world's most powerful nation, the United States of America, acts like a pitiful, helpless giant, the forces of totalitarianism and anarchy will threaten free nations and free institutions throughout the world. It is not our power, but our will and character that is being tested tonight.
Years later, we would see the results of this test. Cambodia has become the battleground of Southeast Asia. The nation was shattered. If Lyndon Johnson carries history's burden for expanding our role in Vietnam, Nixon and Kissinger carry the same burden for sending Americans into Cambodia. The thrust into Cambodia was paid for with funds ticketed for the fighting in Vietnam. Congress finally spoke back to Nixon and ordered him to withdraw American ground troops. Two months after the operation began, the American forces withdrew from Cambodia. The return was a media event.
Thank you.
Cambodia was also a test for ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. If ARVN could successfully take over the war from the military forces of the United States, we could bring American boys home with honor and have a non-communist South Vietnam. Billions of dollars and thousands of lives were bet on this policy, called Vietnamization, but privates who made $168 a month had an absolutely clear and prophetic view of ARVN.
Well, I think they're going to need a lot of help because, for one thing, they don't want to take over. I can tell, you know, they just don't want to get out there and get with the action when they can stay back and the United States can fight the war for them.
Do you think that ARVN can fight the war in Cambodia on their own?
No, sir. They've not got enough courage. They've just not got their stuff together.
Why should they try? We're feeding them, we're taking care of them, we're clothing them, giving everything they need. So why should they even try? They can just sit back and relax, and we'll take care of everything for them.
That wasn't the view of the Nixon administration. Vietnamization had to work. ARVN had to become a fighting army. Although everybody in the president's group supported Vietnamization, some thought that the invasion of Cambodia was a mistake. The State and Defense Departments had doubts. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's national security advisor, had his own doubts, but supported the president. With that support, he drew closer to Nixon. One of the most complicated relationships in the Nixon years was that between the president and this man, Henry Kissinger. Nixon has spoken publicly about Kissinger and Cambodia.
Henry came in one day and he said, you know, I'm not sure that we should have gone into this Cambodian thing, and perhaps now has come the time that we should shorten the time and get out a little sooner. And Cambodia it could have been a mistake. And then I said, Henry, we've done it. Remember Lot's wife. Never look back.
1, 2, 3, 4. What Nixon and Kissinger had to face were the domestic consequences of their widened war. 6 students were killed at Kent and Jackson State colleges as demonstrations and riots swept American campuses. Off camera, Nixon called these rioters bums and sent his comments through Vice President Agnew.
Indeed, as for these deserters, malcontents, radicals, incendiaries, the civil and the uncivil disobedience among our young, SDS, PLP, Weatherman 1, Weatherman 2, the Revolutionary Action Movement, Panthers, Lions, hippies, yippies, tigers alike, I'd rather swap the whole damn zoo for a single platoon of the kind of young Americans I saw in Vietnam.
Now there were fewer young Americans in Vietnam, and for this invasion into Laos, ARVN was on its own. We gave them air support, but the battle was theirs to fight. It was to be a decisive test of Vietnamization. A news embargo was put on the invasion.
We want to go up to the sign.
No good.
Where it says the border up there. Just 200 meters. Why?
By the order of the general.
No, the sign says no U.S. personnel beyond there.
Oh.
Well, we just want to go up to the sign, okay? Just to the sign. We're just going up to the sign.
No!
Why?
No.
Just to the sign where it says no U.S. personnel.
Our allies came out on the skids of helicopters, whipped and beaten in a fight with the enemy. Now it was clear how the end would come. Unless we protected them and fought at their side, they would lose their country to the communists. And we were pulling out. Laos showed how the war would be lost. In the same spring, the peace movement descended on Washington, 30,000 strong. If the government wouldn't stop the war, the demonstrators would stop the government. This group destroyed property, slashed tires, smashed store windows. Crashing was the word they used. They did it almost outside White House windows. Americans were sick of the war and equally sick of the peace movement. 3 years earlier, scenes like these would have provoked a strong public reaction. But overexposure to violence led to indifference. There was even sympathy for government forces. The White House was under siege and almost as bitter against these May Day demonstrators as it was against the Viet Cong. Richard Nixon's Attorney General, John Mitchell, gave instructions to the Washington police force on how to arrest people without filing proper legal charges. Over 10,000 persons, including onlookers, were simply swept up and held illegally in improvised jails and holding tanks. This was one of the last great anti-war riots of the 70s. The peace movement was in retreat from the streets, but the administration had other enemies to be faced. In the early 70s, the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, found a new and, to his mind, potentially dangerous group requiring surveillance, the Women's Liberation Movement. Hoover sent the following directive to his field offices, quote, "It is absolutely essential that we conduct sufficient investigation of the Women's Liberation Movement to determine any possible threat they may represent to the security of the United States," end quote. In this country, by tradition, liberty's a woman. One day in the 70s, the newest protest group held a small demonstration at this statue, urging the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. This group this day was under surveillance by the FBI. It wasn't only the politics of these women's groups which would bother the G-men, it was their physical appearance. One official report commented on the unattractiveness of the women and cited the extreme fuzziness of their hair. Years later, the Bureau decided that the Women's Liberation Movement was not a threat to the internal security of this country. But the FBI was right about one thing. The movement was a threat to the traditional structure of the American family.
Freedom now! Freedom now!
The Kilgore, Texas Rangerettes, traditional young women, raised to be dream girls. In the halftime of a game played only by men,